Welcome back, everybody, to Quid Prog Quo, the musical podcast where I introduce my friends and loved ones to progressive rock music, and they in turn get me to listen to whatever they want. And today we've got a very special guest of Banana. I've known Banana for, we figured out it was like over 5 years, which is really saying something. Really excited. I know her from my I guess, role playing game era of my life. And they are just an amazing individual. And I love hanging out with them as much as I possibly can because I just feel like, especially with this lockdown, we haven't had a chance to really connect. So, this is what this podcast is all about. I'm really excited to dive in and regale you in our time together. And before we do, I always love to give a huge shout out to Olena Alinsky for designing the show's graphic, as well as Explosive Ear Candy for their track Altogether Now, which is the soundtrack to this podcast. So, without further ado, let's dive into this week's episode.
Oh,
It's a little abrasive, but I'm glad that, because before the only way you knew that it was being recorded was like a little thing up in the corner.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so now you actually have to be like, oh, it's being recorded, I'm out.
Yeah.
Or like it gives you an audio thing being like it's being recorded. So
Nice.
yeah, it's slowly getting more accessible for everybody and being a little bit more great for people instead of just
Yeah.
being very sneaky. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I saw that Google Meet is trying to do something similar too. They're like the
Oh, is
competitor now.
it? Yeah, because what was it? It was Google Hangouts for a while, and then they tried to do the whole Google Meet last year while Zoom was like becoming a new thing. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much for agreeing to come on, Banana.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a while since we've hung out. I mean,
It
okay, this isn't
has.
really hanging out, but close enough.
Close enough, yeah. Do you want to let everybody know like how I know you and just how amazing you are? Because like you're one of the big, at least in my life, movers and shakers that I can be like, I know this person kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm Banana Chan. She, her, they, them. I am the owner and co-designer and co-owner, sorry, of a small box board game slash RPG publishing company called Game in a Curry. But I also do like writing and design and all that stuff for other companies. So my latest work has been on Ravenloft, which is for like fifth edition D&D. And I also designed Junction Blow in the Banquet Hall, co-designed Junction Blow in the Banquet Hall with my co-designer Sanfon Lim. And I think that's like the two big things that most people know me for.
Right.
Oh, and also I was a lead haunt writer for Scooby-Doo Betrayal at Mystery Mansion.
Which is just amazing. Like,
Thank you.
like huge up and coming. Like when I saw that your name was in Ravenloft, I was like, this is fantastic. So that's just, I was blown away, and I'm so excited to see all of your future things because you're always putting out new things and new items.
Oh,
So
thanks.
yeah, no, I'm super excited to have you on here. And I mean, we met, I believe the first time we ever met was actually at VidCon way back when.
Yeah, that was how long ago was that? Was that like 5 years ago
I think
or?
it was 5 years ago. It was like, was it 2017?
Oh wow, yeah, it must have been
Yeah, because
2017.
I think that's when I went. Either 2017 or 2018, but I think it was 2017. Um, and like from there, whenever I'm going to a gaming convention, I always make sure to say, "Banana, I'm coming." Like, make sure you're
I
there.
I am there. I
Mhm.
will be there. And I also find it really funny that in VidCon, it's like obviously the two Canadians find each other,
That's always how it
right?
goes. Yeah, yeah. Whenever there's an international convention of any kind, the Canadians will always find one another. You can just follow it through our stories, right?
Yeah, and it's not even like it was planned or anything. It was
No.
just like we randomly bumped into one another.
Yeah, and then friendship was had. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was great. So yeah, super stoked to have you on board. And as always, I always try with this podcast to introduce people to music that I think they'll enjoy. But because I know you through this one more niche area of my life, I didn't know where our crossover for music is. So I think we're going in both a little bit blind, which I'm pretty excited for. So before I give you the album of my choice, why don't you talk a little bit about the album of your choice?
So I chose Billy Talent, their latest album. I'm assuming it's called the Forgiveness Trilogy. So
Mhm.
right now I'm working on another game with Senfon Lim, and it is called One Night Only, and
Ooh.
you are kids. You're basically playing kids who are in their senior year of high school, and you have a band. Maybe you've been playing for a while. Maybe you just started playing. Maybe you were just like, okay, I just want to start a band. Whatever. It's a cool thing to do, right?
Mhm.
And so eventually the band breaks up because you go to college, you do your thing, or like you move away or what have you, right?
Yeah.
So once you graduate, once the summer's over, you just end up splitting up. And later on, you play as your adult selves reuniting and meeting up again. So one of the bands I've been listening to is Billy Talent, but like
Right.
all of their stuff that I listened to when I was like in high school,
Right.
right? So it's just like, oh, this brings back so many memories. Oh, wait a second, they're still around. They're
Yeah.
still making music. This
Yeah.
is really weird and cool.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
yeah, that's one of the reasons why I brought them up.
that's great. Yeah, I'm looking. The latest one that they put out was in 2016 of Afraid of Heights. Is that the one that we're looking at?
I think so.
Okay.
So I did not do a lot of research on this.
That's
I will
cool.
let you know that.
No, that's all right.
But they did like a mini movie type of thing, and it was called
Oh.
like the Forgiveness Trilogy, and it was like
Okay.
it's very. I only like skimmed through it a little bit, but it was like it's very it's like sci-fi, sort of like Dune-esque type of
Ooh.
thing that's going on. Yeah, it's very strange.
Well, I love Dune, so that'll be all right. Let's see.
Dune-esque. I mean, it's not exactly the same as Dune.
I'm
It's
just
like
trying to
set in the
find
desert.
this.
That's like the only thing.
The Forgiveness Trilogy. I'm looking for anything for the Forgiveness Trilogy.
I think it might be on their YouTube.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Um,
Yeah, I'm doing a deep dive. Billy Talent Forgiveness. Okay, I've got a few. I've got Forgiveness 1 and 2.
yeah.
That was a year ago. Forgiveness 1, Forgiveness 2. So I'm gonna go right to there. Maybe there's like a playlist of a bunch of them
Yeah, maybe.
because I've
So
got yeah.
I'm not sure if this is a part of their last album, like the
Hmm.
I'm Afraid of Heights one, or
Mm-hmm.
if it's something completely different.
Yeah, something a little bit different. Yeah, because
Hmm.
there's the I Beg to Differ, which came out, I believe, a couple years ago, and then Afraid of Heights is their other big one.
Hmm.
Videos. What I can do is I can listen to that Forgiveness chapter 1 and 2, and then just continue to listen to some good Billy Talent because
Nice.
I will be completely honest. Billy Talent was a band that I knew of, and a lot of my friends knew of, and they all loved, but I never really got into them. Even though like Billy Talent, like their debut album in 2003 and their follow up in 2006 was like huge at the time,
Hmm.
I was never a big fan of that style of music. I was listening more towards, well, especially at that time, I was diving into like the 70s and all of those stuff. And I had a little bit of elitism that I've thankfully shed away, but it was like, if it wasn't written like 30 years ago, it's not quality content, which is complete and utter BS. Um, so yeah, I've never actually sat down and listened to a full Billy Talent project outside of just a song here and there. So
Yeah, they were really big. They were on Much Music for a while. There was like that
mhm.
whole phase in like Canadian music. I guess it's history now because it's like
Yeah, like
I
this
feel
is
old for saying it.
almost 20 years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there was that whole era where it was like, oh, there was all these bands that were like Billy Talent. Like there was I mean, not even Sum 41, right? Like Sum 41 had that pop punk feel.
Yes.
Billy Talent was like a little more like edgy and like
Yeah,
scene.
there was a little bit more aggression in them. Like I feel
Hmm.
like Sum 41 and Blink 182, I always called them bubblegum punk because they were
Hmm.
like that very happy, like go lucky. We have a little bit of aggression in some of our lyrics, but for the most part, we're just here to party. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like Billy Talent was a little bit more aggressive in their approach.
I
So,
think at some point though as well that like Sum 41 and Blink 182 they were like, okay, we gotta get more aggressive now. And then
mhm.
they had like that whole, I don't know, that weird phase of like, oh, we're just gonna be like there was that one music video that Sum 41 made fun of the Strokes for, where it was just like
Oh,
that back set where it was just like
yeah.
it was just like bright lights. It looked like they were on a TV set.
Hmm.
And then they sort of changed their sound,
Yeah.
which was interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, all bands kind of need to do that in order to grow and not just become stagnant. But I
Mhm.
feel like that was almost in a direct response to kind of the music that was going on, and especially the back catalog of like, okay, we're a little bit older, we can't just party all the time. Let's actually get back to the root of where we started from.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the album that I have for you is almost in direct opposition to all this. This is from one of those bands from the 70s that, I'm pretty sure while you were listening to these guys, I was listening to this.
Nice.
So this is from a band called Yes.
Oh, okay.
Do you know Yes?
Yes, I do know yes.
Okay, so tell me
But
a little
which
bit.
album?
Well, I want to know your familiarity with Yes before I dive into it.
So I have listened to just a little bit of their music, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I haven't really, I wasn't, it's more like a thing that you hear on the radio because over
Yeah,
here, like occasionally they play on the radio.
yeah.
But now it's sort of just like, okay, I hear about them on the radio. I never really listened to them back when I was like in high school or anything.
Yeah.
High school, it was more like, Billy Talent and all that.
Yeah.
But now I'm hearing more of them because I also
Hmm.
listen to WFMU,
Okay.
which is a radio station here that plays like really odd music, just like random music all
Right,
around.
right. Like there's no real like not schedule. What am I thinking of? Like library of music. I'm trying to think. There's a like specific word of like the type of music that you listen to. Programming maybe like no specific program of. It's just all
Yeah,
over the place.
they have programming,
Hmm.
but it's set to a point where it's just like, okay, you turn it on, you don't know what to expect, kind of thing. And their
Okay.
DJs are phenomenal.
Oh,
I
that's fun.
love their DJs. They're so great. In the morning, there is this one DJ called Clay Pigeon, and
Hmm.
he just plays whatever he feels like
Oh, that's great.
for the day. And
Yeah.
I think you would love WFMU. It's like one of the
Ooh.
greatest radio stations
I'm
that
gonna make a
I have
note of that
encountered.
because I honestly haven't listened to the radio in like years. WFMU.
Yeah.
Um, like I only listen to it when I'm up at the family cottage because what else are you going to listen to up there? And it's only like the classic rock stations, which play
Hmm.
like the same five AC/DC and Led Zeppelin songs over and over and over again, which is fine if you like that. But after a while, they start to get a little repetitive. Um,
Yeah.
so the album I have for you is one of my favorites from them, and it comes at a very odd point in the whole progressive rock landscape. This is their 1977 release of "Going for the One."
Ooh, I don't
Yeah,
know if I know that
so
one.
in 1977, progressive rock was kind of on the way out. In my mind, progressive rock really started from like 1969 and then started to fizzle out by like 1975.
Hmm.
There were still bands that were putting out music, but in terms of like that peak experimentation, art rock, just trying whatever works, um, had kind of gone down after about 1975, 1976. And I think the public was exhausted by, music that was 20 minutes long with ridiculous compositions that didn't make any sense. And so most of those prog bands were either folding up or transitioning into more of a popular like a popular expression. Like Genesis in the 80s went pop. Pink Floyd kind of disbanded and rebanded afterwards. Yes, afterwards would go full on pop with like Owner of a Lonely Heart. But this weird kind of a transition phase, especially when like by 1977 punk was really coming in and being a force to be reckoned with as almost a direct opposition of progressive rock, like where progressive rock was overly produced, they had long stretches of music, like overlay compositions, and talked about like space wizards. Punk was coming on, it was short, it was punchy, it was hard, it was fast, and it was also very political. um, so it was a very strange time. So this comes out in that time.
I'm excited.
So they're still trying their best to be that symphonic sounding of music, but they're less like, for example, this album has 5 songs on it, and that's it. And this is the most amount of songs that they've had on an album for their past like 4 or 5 albums, because all their other albums either had 3 or 4 songs on that, and that includes their double album. So
Nice. Okay, cool.
yeah, so this one, it's one of my favorites, and we'll talk a little bit more once you have a listen to it. But yeah, that's kind of the context and the surroundings of this album, and I'm super excited for you to dive in and have a listen to it.
I'm very excited to listen.
Yeah.
But before we do, I have a quick question.
Of course.
Did you watch the Sparks documentary?
I never got around to it. I really want to.
I think it's just called the Sparks Brothers.
It is. Yeah, that's the Edgar Wright one, right?
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, so theaters still aren't open. I think they opened up last week where I'm at. And there's no showings of it here. And I'm too lazy to try to find it online, because what streaming service is it on?
I think I watched it on Amazon. I don't remember, but just a warning, it is 2.5 hours long.
Woof. All right. All right. Well, I mean, I don't know too much about the Sparks. I know that the tagline for it was "It's your band's favorite band." So
yeah, and yeah, in the movie they talk a little bit about like how what you were talking about, you know, with punk rock becoming a thing in the 70s.
Yeah.
It sort of enveloped, you know, Sparks, and they just like sort of died into the background. Even though they were trying to make music, it was just like harder for them to do anything.
Yeah, it's so interesting when these big movements of music come out and swallow like smaller bands that are either counterculture or of the current culture. Like I'm remembering another band called Cardiacs that was coming out in like the mid to late 80s, which was more of like a marriage between progressive rock and punk. But then they got swallowed up with grunge, because grunge was very much a heavier, more sophisticated version of metal music. But yeah, I know I really need to see that movie, because everybody that I know that loves music is like, you got to see it, because Edgar Wright really does a good job of showcasing the love of the band and what it all means.
I suggest streaming it just so you can take breaks. It's very long.
Right. That's okay. That's okay. I'll probably do that. Okay, so I will go and listen to this couple songs from Billy Talent, and then would you suggest I listen to their first album or their second album?
Oh gosh, which I don't even remember what is that the Fallen Leaves one? Is
So
Fallen Leaves one
there's
of the
Billy Talent and then Billy Talent 2.
Oh, they just named it after. Okay, well that's easy enough. I would say probably 2. I like 2 better.
Okay.
That's the one with that's the one with the songs that I think I liked better.
Okay. So yeah, I'll listen to those trilogy albums, the Suffering ones or whatever it was. And then I'll dive in and listen to Billy Talent 2. And then you can enjoy Awaken. Going for the one. Awaken's my favorite track off of that.
Nice. I'm going to listen to all 5 songs.
Okay.
6 songs. Is it 6 or 5?
5. After Awaken,
okay, awesome.
After Awaken, you can stop listening, because they'll probably just be like bonus material that they always shove on there. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. So I will see you in just over 50 minutes or so.
See you soon.
And with that, Banana and I go into our own musical silos to listen to one another's music. I dive a little bit deep into the Billy Talent discography, which I've never had a chance to do so. And Banana has a chance to check out one of my favorite Yes albums. So while we're doing that, I want to give a few shout outs to some patrons of mine. Triple Nine is my latest patron. So thank you so much, Triple Nine, for donating to my Patreon. And I also want to give a huge shout out to Philippe. Philippe has donated to me in the past, and I want to make sure that I give a proper shout out to him. So if you want to be cool like Triple Nine and Philippe, head on down to my Patreon. I've left it in the description if you're watching this on YouTube, or it's Patreon/Notes Reviews if you're listening to this on your podcast. And that kind of goes into my next note of hey, we're on YouTube. So if you want to check this out on YouTube and you haven't already, it's the usual Quid Prog Quo. It's a little bit harder to find, but if you search one of the titles of the episodes like Yes and Billy Talent, such as this on Quid Prog Quo, I'm sure you'll be able to find it out. We're all pretty tech savvy. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hey, we've got a podcast as well. So a little bit of cross-examination on that side. So please head on over to Patreon/Notes Reviews. It really helps me out. It keeps the lights on wherever I'm at the moment. And yeah, it's just a good time. And if you haven't followed my other stuff, I've got my tabletop role-playing game stuff. That's over on Notes on tabletop role-playing games, and my usual music reviews on Notes Reviews. And I think that covers the whole gamut of it. So let's dive back into this podcast, find out what Banana thought about Yes and what I thought about Billy Talent. Let's dive back in. So with your fancy drink, how was it? How was your deep dive into the Yes album?
So, it was very different from what I remember, what I know of Yes.
Okay.
And I guess I should have probably mentioned this earlier. I had the impression that Yes was like a dad rock band.
I mean, you're not wrong in that, like, like Roundabout and what I've seen All Good People, like the really big 70s stuff is pretty. It's so weird to call it dad rock because I'm so used to calling it classic rock, but I mean, they change all the time. But yeah, like those are kind of their earlier stuff from like the early 70s. And so this is their progression. And I think on this album, they like retreated all the way to like Northern Europe and just spent a couple months up there to record this album.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah, it does kind of like their roots are from that dad rock, classic rock, progressive rock styles, but this one's a little bit different.
Right. Yeah, I really liked the first track,
Yeah.
Going for the One. That was like, I think that was my favorite, and then Awaken was the second favorite. And then it was like a tie between, what's it, like track 3 and 4 or something like that. It was like,
Yeah, Turn of the Centuries in Parallel.
oh, sorry, no, it's Wonder Stories and Parallels. Those are the two that were a tie for me. And then the last one was probably Turn of the Century.
Yeah, which is so interesting. So was there a reason that Turn of the Century didn't quite do it for you in that sense?
I think I'm just not very good at slow music.
Okay, that's
so
fair.
like slower beats, I just tend to like not be as interested, but that's because I'm like a high anxiety person in general. So I'm just like, I love anxious music.
Right. Which is interesting because for me, because especially in my youth, I was very anxious and like suffered from panic attacks and all that fun stuff. But I found those slower music was calming because my world in my head was always like in high alert. So any music that was in high alert, I'm like, I can't deal with this. This is too much. Give me that soft groove. So that for me, Turn of the Century is one of my favorite tracks just because of the big buildup that we have at the end. But I also can see, because it's the slower piece, it not connecting right away. Yeah.
What about you? What did you think of the tracks?
So yeah, I feel like we'll be going back and forth between the two albums. Most of the time we cover the one album and talk about it in Into the Ground and then talk about the other one. But let's try going back and forth a little bit.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I watched the three, like the trilogy. So like, what is it? Forgiveness Part 1, 2, and 3. So I watched those, and they are much more. They're a video first and like music second, because there's very little music in Part 2, and it takes a while for the music to get going in Part 1. And it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger. So I wonder if there's going to be like a Part 4 later on.
Yeah, maybe.
But I really enjoyed it. I like the story. I love the setting that we're in. I love, like, for me, I love cinema as metaphor. So like I love a lot of like Darren Aronofsky's videos, and I love a lot of like the weird 70s stuff, like the Holy Mountain, where like what you're seeing on screen is really not what's going on. Like it's all
Hmm.
like metaphors. So I liked a lot of the stuff that was on here in that video sense of like, eat the salt, you are the salt, eat the corn, you are the corn, drink the venom, you are the venom, and like that kind of stuff, like you are what you eat, you are what you consume. Um, and the music itself, very much like you, I thought that Billy Talent was much more of like the aggressive screamo music.
Hmm.
And that really wasn't what I was getting. I was getting like the harder rock stuff from like that early 2000s. And so when I dove into the album proper of Billy Talent 2, I was getting a lot of the foundational sounds from more of the hardcore metal stuff that we have today from bands like Protest the Hero and Cambrian and oh shoot, I can never
Coheed
remember.
and Cambria?
That's the one I'm thinking
Yeah.
of. Yeah, like those styles that were like really being played with in the 2000s and 2010s. Like I'm feeling a lot of
Mhm.
that groundwork on that, and I guess I was well, not hoping. I was expecting a lot more hardcore stuff on this, and I wasn't getting that. And I'm like, oh, I'm pleasantly surprised. So yeah, it was like a very interesting like expectations and reality aspect to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Mm-hmm.
also wonder if it's because like we have like our ears have grown up, right? A
Mm-hmm.
little bit as
Mm-hmm.
well. So maybe like, what we remember as kids or what we remember, listening to before is like completely different from what we're, hearing now.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also like the musical landscape has evolved and changed. Like
Hmm.
as much as we no longer have like a spirit of the time or like a zeitgeist of a decade, right? Like the 80s music sounds so much different from the 70s music, that sounds so much different from the 60s music. Like music from the early 2000s doesn't really sound all that different 20 years later from now. Like there's still
Hmm.
bands that sound very much like Billy Talent, um, and that kind of harder edged rock. Because maybe for me, I always thought that Billy Talent was, as I mentioned before, like a screamo band,
Hmm.
and that wasn't what I was getting. And so, whereas screamo is much more dated in that mid 2000s, you don't really hear those bands anymore. But like I
Yeah.
very much heard a lot of today's bands in the Billy Talent that I was listening to with that second album of theirs.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that was definitely my favorite album out of all of their
Mm-hmm.
music.
Yeah, and I can definitely see how you were saying it's a very visual album, because I could see how a lot of these would lend their hands very well at being like a music video.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
yeah. Moving back to Yes for a second, you said that your favorite tracks were Going for the One and Awaken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like this has to do with like the visual element as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like I picture like going for the one is like taking a trip to Vegas. Like that's what it felt like to
Okay.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
like Vegas in a way that like you're going there and you have a destination in mind, you have like a job to do, but then it ends up like going awry. That's
Mm-hmm.
like sort of what's going on when I hear it.
Yeah.
Um, and like Awaken as well. Like Awaken is a little different. That's like a totally different storyline, but that's what I felt like when I was listening to this.
Yeah, and I mean, I've never really been to Vegas. Like the closest I got was California, but I can imagine it's that overabundance of stimulation.
Hmm.
And with Going for the One, once we get to that final course where they're basically just like listing all these different things, and it just becomes more and more and more until it finally resolves at the very end. I feel like the Vegas experience would be very similar in it being very overwhelming and overabundance of the stimulation until finally you're like, oh, okay, it's all kind of clicking together with either a show or I don't know, something else that's in Vegas.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think like with Awaken, it was like it. it was like very cinematic too, right? Like
Hmm.
the music felt very cinematic. It's definitely longer, but like it didn't feel that long.
Yeah, yeah, and
Um,
that's one of my favorite things about Awaken because you really have two acts in Awaken. You have that first act that has its full, you know, setup, payoff, and then ending, and then it goes into the second half that does the exact same thing, and it is very cinematic. I think that the word that they used was symphonic, but it's
oh.
yeah, it's still very applicable because it is cinematic. It does have this excuse me, storytelling aspect to it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that like these songs, or I like it when musicians, you know, make music that is visual without the visuals. If that makes
Hmm.
any sense.
Yeah, like just to go back to Turn of the Century because Turn of the Century is my second favorite track off of this. I feel like that track for me is very visual, and I've started listening to it, I have a very crystal clear visual of what takes place, but
Ooh.
it's like just for me, right? Like, I don't think that there's like an actual storyline that's going through it, but for me, I always picture at the very beginning, it's two people that are like chance passing on the street, and then it flashes either forward in time or back in time to this big masquerade ball where people are like dancing around and getting to know each other, and then it's those same two people that meet on the dance floor and slowly start to dance. But then this is where I guess that instrumental piece happens where they leave the dance floor by like basically starting to float and then fly up into the clouds, and then you have this big climax and explosion of sound where they're literally dancing on the clouds, and then they slowly start to drift back down onto the dance floor, and then the camera zooms back and they're back on the street passing one another, and then they turn to glance at each other as like a recognizable kind of like I think I know you.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so that's my whole like visual mind playing with the music in that sense.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's strangely like both of these like bands that we've chosen have similarities in terms of not necessarily like musical style, but like style in the way that they portray their music. If
Yes,
that makes
I
any sense.
agree. I agree. Like, and this is one of my favorite things about this podcast is like finding how very different musical styles like interconnect and
Mm-hmm.
have links. Because I agree. Like, I had written down a number of tracks on here that I felt very visually. Like Pins and Needles, for instance, was a very visual um, track and having this really nice softer flow to it, and kind of being sandwiched between some of the harder tracks. Worker Bees might be my favorite track off this album. I love the progression of it because I love tracks that change and evolve and end somewhere very different than where they started at, and I love that progression through this. And I think if I sat down and listened to it more, I could feel my brain starting to come up with some storyline to enhance whatever the music was telling me. And the final track that I wrote down that I really, really enjoyed was Where is the Line? Because I love the great guitar bridge that kind of centers this track. Um,
Nice.
yeah, those were the ones. And then I did keep my ear out for what was the one that you liked? That was Falling Leaves?
Oh, I liked Fallen Leaves, and
Fallen
then
Leaves.
there's uh Devil
Devil.
at the Midnight Mass or
Yeah, that
something.
I
Yeah.
said it was the last track, but the last track is the demo version of that. It starts the
Oh.
album off with Devil in a Midnight Mass, and it does a great job of opening up the album. I thought
Mm-hmm.
like it prepared me for the music that I would be hearing throughout the rest of the album.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
wonder also like if this has anything to do with us being like role players, like people who play
Maybe.
like role playing games. Like we're just like, oh yeah, okay, totally see this. This is
Yeah.
definitely like the vibe that this thing would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is
Mm-hmm.
how our movie would take place.
Yep. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like this is the people that will be filling out the story. This is like the beats that I'm hoping to hit. This is how
Yeah.
the characters evolve and change and the conflicts that they will have to come into for sure. I'm sure that really plays a part in maybe like the visual theater of the mind that we have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just
Yeah.
recently learned about I was like watching this video on um aphantasia and hyperphantasia, which are
Okay.
like the two. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not. No, educate me.
So, okay, this is really exciting and
Okay.
like really interesting to me. So, aphantasia or Fantasia in general, or I think it's called Fantasia, or like, it's probably got like a fancier word than that. I call it Fantasia because it sounds cool.
Yeah.
But basically, it's the idea that you can see things in your mind. So, you have like a theater of the mind, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And you can like visualize things.
Hmm.
Hyperphantasia is like the extreme form of that where you can actually see like lifelike images in your head.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
like everything, you can make stuff up in your head to a degree that's like extremely lifelike.
Right.
Aphantasia, I realized, watching several videos on it, um, are people that don't actually see anything in their heads. Like
Interesting.
they have
Okay.
no, they can't like form images, or they can't even form like, anything that's like a theater of the mind type of
Hmm.
thing. So it's really interesting. Like I wonder what music is like for people with aphantasia.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, thinking about that, I also wonder. Well, I'm sure it works auditorily because, like, when you're reading, you have a voice in your head reading to you,
Mm-hmm.
or at least maybe, like, I have that. So I remember when I was in my undergrad and I was taking like 6 courses at the same time, and I had to keep all the different disciplines kind of separate. I would read the different textbooks with a different celebrity's voice so that I could call upon that information by thinking about that celebrity. So, like, that's why for me, cognitive behavioral therapy will always be in Steve Buscemi's voice. Like,
That's
when I was
hilarious.
studying that in my later undergrad, that was like my entire focus. But then neurocognitive behavior is all in Idris Elba's voice. So, like, I've got these two very distinct characters where I'm like, okay, when I
Mm-hmm.
need to remember about CBT, it's all Steve. But when I've got to remember about all the different lobes in my brain, then I'm calling upon Idris. So,
That's a really good way of remembering things, because like I always find it hard to like remember facts and figures and all of that stuff.
mhm.
So I feel like this would be like the easiest way for me to remember
Yeah.
something. Just like pretend it's a celebrity teaching you all this stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was perfect, especially for recall. I was just like, oh, what is it? Okay, think about Steve. Think about Steve. Okay, yeah, there it is.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is so fascinating about like being able to like picture something in my brain and then those who don't, right? And I wonder if
Yeah.
when they listen to music, because very much like Fantasia, the Disney movie, whenever I listen to music,
Mm-hmm.
it's either images or full on stories, or sometimes it's just color blotches. But I wonder if for them, is there anything going on at all?
Right.
That is
Yeah.
such an interesting topic of conversation that I could bring to this podcast now of like,
Yeah.
what do you see? Is there anything going on?
I wonder if it's like they are living in the moment, like they're not even, they're not even like thinking of anything. They're just
Hmm.
like, I'm just making a lot of assumptions now
No, no,
of
but
like what this might be like, but we are just like, you're like actually listening to the music, instead
mhm.
of projecting like images in your head.
Right. Yeah. That's so fascinating. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention because that's
Oh
such a great thing to think about now.
yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Because for me, if we go back to like Awaken, there is like no like very tangible images when I think of that one, as opposed to like Turn of the Century, which has very tangible. But I get this like very big, bright ball at the end, especially with that big climax, where we have that, I call it like the wind up and punch. With the very last part where there's, they're building, there's more and more tension going on. And then we get this massive sound of the organ with everybody playing at the same time. And I just get this massive bright ball. Um, and yeah, that's like what's coming to my mind, but it'd be fascinating to find out like what's going through other people's heads on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's sort of like also on the other end of the spectrum, it's just sort of like, what does it look like for people who have hyperphantasia, right? So
Mhm.
like if you're listening, and I guess this is sort of different from synesthesia. Is that what's called?
I think so.
What's it
That's
called?
where is that where you cross senses, where you like can
Yeah,
see
you can like,
smells and
yeah, like,
hear colors?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I feel like I think it's different. and I'm definitely no expert on this. I just like watch YouTube videos and they like put me down a rabbit hole of more stuff to watch.
Yeah.
But I wonder like what the visuals look like when you're
Mm.
listening to music
Yeah.
with hyperphantasia.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I just create stories just because that's what my brain does, but it'd be so fascinating to find out what other stories people come with, like the same stimulus. That'd be
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you really, really enjoyed Yes and going for the one. Because
I did.
I didn't want to say I was worried, but like there was a moment where I'm like, oh, well, she's giving me Billy Talent, and this is so different. So I hope that this connects, because there's a very strong possibility that maybe this hippie dad rock strange sounds from the late 70s doesn't quite connect as much.
Quick note, I only chose Billy Talent because I was listening to Billy Talent at the time for that one project.
Right, right. But I mean, it forced me to listen to an album and a group that I had completely written off, because in high school, you were either of the camp of, you know, the Billy Talents and like the newer musics, or you were of the camp of like, because a theater kid, right? We were only listening to like theater music or very sophisticated music. And it's like, oh, we couldn't possibly dirty our hands with this. And I'm just like, that is like, go take a nap. Jeez, that is not, good music can be found everywhere. Jesus.
Yeah.
So
It's like I guess the classic version of the e-girls and the Visco girls today.
I guess
Which
so.
I know nothing about, but I just
I
I
guess
assume
so.
there's like an ongoing battle between those two
Well,
camps of people.
yeah, I'm sure like whenever within the same format of like two different expressions, you're always going to have, well, our camp is better than your camp. And it's just like both camps are valid. Let's just all be friends. Like, let's see what they're doing and see what we can improve upon. Like, Jesus. Oh,
exactly.
boy. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Banana. This was a fantastic time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I'm glad that I have new music to listen to.
That's right. Is there anything else you want to promote or let the listeners know about? Because I know that you're doing so much.
Oh, I do have a new horror tabletop role-playing game coming out on Kickstarter in September. It's called Damos Academy, and it is designed by myself, Austin Knight, and Amanda Call. And it comes in a coloring book, so you are coloring things in, drawing out your fears, your character's fears throughout the game in certain spaces in this coloring book. And basically, you're adults returning back to your creepy old boarding school and uncovering fears and uncovering memories and doing all that creepy stuff.
That's so cool. I love a good horror RPG, and to find one that's done well is really hard. So I'm very excited to dive into this.
I really hope you like it.
I'm going to be so excited when I also realized that we have an affinity for Nicolas Cage pillows. I have two that are on my couch. I'm just going to grab them real quick.
Oh, I'll grab mine too.
Yeah, so we can show those off.
Nicolas Cage pillow party. Okay, so I have several of. Oh, you have several of them too.
I do. I have more than one.
Okay, so I don't know why people keep sending these to me for some strange reason. I have several of them.
Yeah, and that's it. Like full disclosure, I have not purchased any of these. These were things that people have given me. So I feel like we give off a very similar vibe. I have this one here, which is him as Little Mermaid saying, "I can't be caged."
I love that.
And then this is the tried and true, my darling.
I'm so jealous. Why is no one ever sends me like any cool ones? They always send me the same one, and it's always the sequence.
Oh, it's the sequence one, right?
Yeah, I have 3 of these. These are
three?
only 2 of them. Yeah.
Holy jeez.
So I have 3 of these sequin ones, and I also have this one because
I love that one. Yeah, yeah, it's so perfect. I think that's the perfect way to end this episode with our collection of Nicolas Cage pillows. Thank you so much for coming on once again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And if you haven't already followed us on Twitter and Instagram, it's always Quid Prog Quo. Like, subscribe, do all those fun things. And give some love to Banana. She's been amazing.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.